Hi, folks. I'm John Chrastka, Executive Director for EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. This is Designing the Fundable Strategic Plan, one of the series of 2022-2023 training videos that EveryLibrary Institute is doing for the Utah State Library for library leaders like yourselves. We are going to be spending a little bit of time today talking about the structure of strategic planning processes in a way that might be a little different than what you've been used to getting from other training programs. Less about the methodology of, say, a survey instrument or the particular questions, more about the reasons behind the questions that we want to ask. We know very clearly here at EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute that the strategic plan, the building plan, the plan of service, your collection development plan, there's a lot of different plans that you have. Well, all of them are impactful when it comes to not only building use of the library, which is very important to be able to do, but more importantly, if I may, is building support for the library. It might be political support, it might be with your funding community, it might be with folks who are likewise aligned as you are with different aspects of programming, and certainly a focus on populations or that place that you both call home. What I'm going to do today is take you through some things about us very briefly, root this conversation in what we are doing, what you are doing, I should say, at the among the libraries in Utah, especially around standards and reaccreditation, and then take you through the theoretical framework. Part of our work, and I'm going to stop sharing my video while it's lovely to see you, you don't need to see me the whole time. This program is part one of a 12-month series that we're doing for the Utah State Library. This one, again, is on creating more effective boards. We're doing these every other month. September 2022 is the first of our board. We'll skip a month with the board stuff, come back in November, et cetera, et cetera. The other components of what we're doing are around marketing to build support. And then we will do something which I think is very important, which is a coaching call. We want to do coaching calls because when you're attending these kinds of programs, you have questions, comments, and concerns, please write them down this time. Please try to remember them because we're going to get together for September of 2022. We're getting together for a live event on September 27th at 6 o'clock Mountain Time online via the State Library. They'll be sending out the link for this as well. We want to talk about the things that are of concern to you. This is not a hold the questions to the end and then your question's too specific. We want to talk about the things that are troubling you, bothering you, getting in your way, or that you want to learn a little bit more about. That's the whole reason that we're here to do this with you. Again, we're at the EveryLibrary Institute. We're a public policy, tax policy, education policy think tank for libraries. We're set up as a 501c3, which means we're a nonprofit. We have a research agenda that covers a wide range of public library and school library issues. We do these kinds of training programs for state libraries and state library associations around the country, and individual libraries from time to time. And then we have a lot of different programmatic partnerships. We're going to be rooting this work today and throughout our program of our training program with you in that C3 side. We do have our C4 side, which is our political action committee. But what we're talking about here today is not on the ground direct lobbying activity. It's, well, you know, where's the money going to go when we tax people, and how are we going to spend the money? All right, so forgive me, the first place I want to level set here when we're having this conversation in September of 2022 is where this strategic planning and long-range planning process hits in today's day and age, and what components of this are reflecting what the current state of play is for your library and libraries around the state of Utah, around the country. And then what elements of this are going to be more enduring, even as we move into different kind of political, social, economic aspects of things moving forward. First off, I want to make sure that you know that we're rooting all of our training here in the strategic planning process for Utah libraries. From the Utah Division of Libraries, the State Library, part of their work is to make sure that libraries of all different types and sizes have the support they need. And there are requirements, though, within this project for your accreditation and for your reaccreditation. They require, I think very smartly at the Utah State Library, strategic and long-range plans because they're part of good management of taxpayer resources, fundamentally. as a taxpayer-supported institution, how are you putting that small amount of smart tax money to work in the most effective ways possible? The process by which you were supposed to be forming your strategic and your long-range planning is, according to the State Library of Utah, it's informed in its development and annually in an open and transparent and inclusive way by its very design. And the insights that we're going to be sharing with you today, especially, are focused on that open, that transparent, and then inclusive. The inclusivity of it here is not just a virtue, it's a tactic. And a lack of inclusivity on your strategic planning process makes it more and more difficult, especially in a contentious period, for new funding to flow for the library and new opportunities to flow for the library to put its mission, vision, and values to work. Utah State Library, likewise, requires that your initiatives in your long-range plan, in your strategic planning process, are comprehensive, not only with services, and services is a big, that's a big word, collections, programs, staffing, but your facilities, the accessibility of your library and its collections, and then also, which I think is very progressive, honestly, the public relations and marketing and outreach side of things. The measures component of it in the Utah State Library requirements for your strategic plan and your long-range plan include the need to understand where your inputs of funding are coming in, your inputs of staff, your inputs of collections, your inputs of talent when it comes to programming, for example, what the outputs are, what are you doing with it all, and what the expected and hoped for or achieved outcomes truly are. The process, well, it's described in detail here in standard number 3 of the Utah State Library, 2022-2023 standards work. The board has approved, this is one of the requirements for you folks, the board has approved and is operating under a long-range plan. It must cover a 3-year time span, it must be reviewed on an annual basis, and it must contain, and here is where we're going to get into the meat of things, the mission and values of the library, the vision, the value system that undergirds all of this work. Because the rest of what is required in standards number 3, background information about the library, excellent. Specific and quantifiable goals, definitely. Provisions for replacement and enhancement of technology, absolutely. And a plan for annual review. These are all the devil in the details. What I want to talk about today as we move forward is the barriers and the enhancements to your mission, your vision, and especially the values that undergird your work. All right, let me switch away from the state library's requirements into more the meat of what I'm here to talk to you about today. We see a few things happening right now around the country. EveryLibrary is active on the ground in numerous zip codes across many states with close partnerships with public libraries, school libraries, state library agencies, and state library associations. And we're paying a lot of attention to the funding conversation. And what I want to highlight for you in terms of your ability to do good strategic planning and long-range planning is what the terroir is, perhaps not just within the library community, but outside. As we are coming through COVID, it's very clear to us from where we sit here in suburban Chicago, but working at scale with a lot of libraries around the country, is that policymakers, elected officials, your voters, and especially philanthropic funders want to see good money going after good ideas. Effective programs, competent staffing. They're looking for proven institutions to leverage. And that goes for elected officials and philanthropy, policymakers, and the voters themselves. But the voters are probably the ones who are least likely to articulate that. Effective programs and competent staffing. They want to not throw good money after bad. They want to support programs and projects that can be measured, which is a requirement already that the state library has for you in standard number 3, but the measurement leads to justification. And I'm going to describe for you as we move through today's conversation about how we can justify funding because of the way that our programs are, well, it's the expected and hoped for outcomes, or it's the cautions that we have if we are not properly funded to do this good work. They, excuse me, they, meaning the donors, the funders, the philanthropists, the policymakers, the politicians and elected officials, They want to see ways to apply the right kind of funding and resources focused on problem solving. And the ability to identify problems in your community is fundamentally one of the core functions of your strategic and long range plans. The ability to identify solutions to those problems, or to demonstrate how your library, well, how is there a library shaped solution to those problems in your community? How is there a librarian or library worker enacted solution to those problems? Is fundamentally what is at the heart of any good strategic planning process. Another thing that we've been observing around the country, budgets are very disrupted right now. While we're recording here in September of 2022, every city, county, town, state has a lot of money right now from the American Rescue Plan, ARPA. There's going to be additional funding coming for broadband through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, both broadband infrastructure building out as well as Digital Equity Act money, which is intended to help support moving people from offline to online in very substantial ways. This relief money, though, it's helping to, in many places, support better economic outcomes. Of course, we're seeing some inflationary pressure right now, but what we know very clearly is that when the funding from these relief plans runs out, and it will run out, it's supposed to run out. That's what they say according to statute. It'll be starting to decline in 23 into 24, and if you have a 3-year event horizon for your long-range and strategic planning, you need to pay attention to 25 and 26, when that money's not available anymore, and we're going to be moving into a new period of austerity in this country. The relief money's not available anymore, which will lead to a lot of volatility in the way that taxes are collected and expended, the way that government works. Austerity is a way of looking at municipal and state budgets that has in it essentially a framework where if you can't prove that the work that you're doing is worth funding, you will not be funded. And austerity also has another component, which is that the things that get funded are not always the best ideas. They're sometimes the ideas that are closest to the funders. These highly volatile budget situations that are coming also lead elected officials, library boards even, to very conservative approaches to spending. We don't know what's happening next, so we're going to shelter our funding. And relief funding, relief money like in the ARPA, infrastructure money that's coming like in the BEAD program, are going to be used as one-time money excuses. Well, we can't institutionalize, we can't try the new idea, we can't bring on the new position because it's one-time money. Even though it's one-time money, it's going to be around for several years. I'm laying out these scenarios here for you because I have a feeling that many of you, if you're watching this webinar today, and if you're going to be with me on the coaching calls later this month, are also concerned. And the event horizon that you're looking at, folks, we have to work on rewriting the budget already. Start thinking about how do we rewrite the budget for your library and therefore your town, your city, your funders in 2025, 2026. There's a few more things coming into play here as we're working on strategic planning and long-range planning, coming through COVID in particular. Whether your community was particularly hard hit or you were affected in different ways, we all have certainly some leftovers from it. And the way people were using libraries during COVID changed significantly. So a lot of what we've been using for our narratives around, say, the third place, it's not home, it's not work, it's the library. We're the front lawn, we're the living room, we're the back porch of our community. These things that we've been talking about the library as a virtuous organization, might be broken right now, or disrupted, forgive me. If you can't say it with a straight face and you can't say it with a lot of data, let's work together on figuring out the true narratives that actually make sense in a post-COVID period. Your virtual, your digital, and your online measures of impact are going to be extraordinarily important in this next strategic planning process. And if you're not tracking right now what you have been doing, if you don't have the systems in place to know what you're circulating that is not physical copies, and how you're interacting in a way that is maybe synchronous or asynchronous virtually, and you're in a little library, I get it, or you're in a big library, believe me, I get it. We have to be able to talk about those aspects of how we have changed in a way that is honest, because the open, transparent approach to strategic planning and the ability to demonstrate outcomes from it is core to the whole process. Where are we at, folks, with nice to have features in this society? And where is the library positionable as a must have for certain aspects of the value system that the community has? The shared mission that you're on with your nonprofit partners, and the vision that your elected officials have for how we want to build place. And I can guarantee across all of these things, all of these political conversations that we're having, all these taxpayer funded and philanthropically funded conversations, you're going to be needing new revenue sources in order to stabilize and extend your work by that 2024, 2025, definitely 2026 period. Okay, so we want to root what we're talking about today in terms of the strategic planning and long-range planning process in those values, vision, and mission, as is required by your state library, which I appreciate, but it's also required by, well, this is the best practices, folks. A strategic plan that looks a lot like a lot of features. We need X number of units of book. We need Y number of human beings working here. We need Z hours. We need features that include large print, small, regular print, digital, online, virtual. We need features of what we're doing that include a clean, well-lighted place, a new space, perhaps something that's upgraded. I mean, those features are the devil in the details of your strategic plan. I'll give you that. But what really transmits from a strategic planning perspective and a long-range planning perspective, the fundable qualities of that plan, whether it's from the taxpayers, from elected officials, or from your philanthropic and donor community, is how are you realizing a shared value system, a common mission, or a vision for the same people or place that we call home. I want to take you through this real quick, because what we want to look at here is the advocacy components as well as perhaps the activism components. I want to do a little theory with you for a moment, because we've confused over time the differences between advocacy and activism. And you're going to hear this from me again if you participate in other ones that I'm working on for this training series. But fundamentally, I got one eye on the fact that advocacy is the long game, which is ideally suited for a strategic planning process. Advocacy is not getting loud. It's not wearing t-shirts. It's not storming the barricades. Advocacy fundamentally is a process of co-creation with a partner that is focused on what can we do together, whether the partner is an elected officials, a legislature, a city council, a town board, whether it's a philanthropic or donor partner, the voters, your constituents, the stakeholders themselves. Advocacy is what we're talking about here. And I want to give you a little bit of theory of advocacy just for a second. As a long game, it's relationship focused. It is working on a co-creation of a fundable future that is rooted in a shared understanding of your value system, your mission, and your common vision. Advocacy, fundamentally, when it works really well, starts with the process, and your strategic plan should have some of this in here, that the folks you want to co-create with might not be very familiar with you. That the first component of an advocacy conversation, a theory of advocacy framework, theory of change approach to advocacy, is that we actually have to educate and orient people who care to what libraries are capable of and who librarians and library workers are. Because the strongest thing that your strategic plan can do, your long-range plan can do, is level set how we can work together with our funders and our partners, as opposed to the particulars of it that are being done just at the library. Let's educate in our strategic plans. Let's orient folks to who we are and why we do the work that we do, and then begin a process in this advocacy conversation around what could those solutions to problems look like? As I said earlier, one of the key elements of your state library's strategic planning standards is how do we solve problems? And ideation with a partner. Hey, what if we did this together? What if we had the right kind of funding? What would it look like if? What would it look like when? Those kinds of thoughtful, engaged pieces are at the core of the strategic planning process and are center point to advocacy initiatives over those same event horizons. Because you cannot start to say what you need in terms of resources, whether it's people, money, a different kind of shape to your building. You can't identify what those are and how you can legitimately have a partner in realizing those until you've gotten through this process of understanding. And then how do we activate across our advocacy conversations is when your partner, maybe a city council, maybe the state legislature, perhaps a philanthropic funder or a donor, certainly your voters, your constituents, and your stakeholders, when we both commit the resources that we have at our disposal to moving that shared ideation framework forward. It's different, though, advocacy and strategic planning than activism. And I want to make sure that we tease these apart because nothing in what I'm describing today is about an activist message. It's not about that kind of loud advocacy. It's not about confrontational activities. It's certainly activism is different. Active advocacy is about who do we want to be, where do we want to go, and how can we get there together. Activism is shorter. It's certainly systems focused, value systems focused. It's certainly identity focused, but it's about seizing opportunities or averting crises. And if you're talking about that with a strategic planning mode, I don't think we're in the right spot. Yes, there is a hope in activism that our personal value system or our collective value system and our ideals and our identity can be realized through our activities. But activism fundamentally is a different conversation. Yes, it's based in shared values. Yes, it wants to build a community of activists together, of idealists together. It has integrity as a process because otherwise, if it lacks honesty or authenticity, no one's going to follow you in an activism approach. It's directing activity among idealists, saying, please do this action so we can either seize opportunity or avert crisis. It organizes folks, but folks, what we're not doing with anything that we're doing today is looking to get loud about libraries, to make short, sharp, or shocking statements. We're looking to use this strategic planning process as a way to surface what we believe, who we are, and where we want to go. Okay, this is an important theoretical environment here that I need to spend a little time with you on because all funding for libraries is fundamentally a political conversation, whether you want it to be or not, except for the 2 to 3% that come in from donors. Maybe 5, 6% if you're particularly good at fundraising. Maybe there's a big grant that's fully funding a particular project, but in the main, across the country, and this holds true pretty well for Utah libraries as well, low 90% of your funding is coming in from your political funding sources, your tax code, the local and state, a little bit of federal. These are inherently political conversations. And when you're starting to begin a conversation about how do we fund our strategic plan, I need you to be very cognizant of the fact that these are political frameworks. It's a political decision as to whether or not we're going to put new resources to work for your library's strategic planning goals, your long range planning goals, your building planning goals, directly or indirectly. Well, there's an old adage that's attributed to our current president. Then Senator Biden would say, show me your budget and I will know your value system. And I don't think he's wrong. What values are we expressing in our budget as a community? Where are we putting our emphasis? Where are we putting our time? It's a little bit like the old adage also about if you don't you measure what you care about what you measure. And I'm not just doing aphorisms here, folks. The form of your budget What's your allocation for collections, for staffing? How do you pay your staff? Like benefits packages? What are you doing about the capital improvement needs of the library, the long-term sustainable needs of technology? All of those functions, I'm sorry, all of those features of your budget allow you to function properly. And the budget policies and programs that you're trying to enact are immediately, proximally through a political lens. So I want you, for the first bit of coaching here about how do we start writing a fundable strategic plan, is to not only understand that this is an advocacy co-creation long game, it's to understand the vocabulary that you currently use as a leadership team at your library and the vocabulary of political conversations that are used outside of your library by your funding partners. First off, the background radiation of what's going on civically. This is from the Pew data from 2016. It's a little bit old, but it hasn't changed much. We're starting to run some tracking polls again post-COVID. Things still line up. Millennials use libraries. Parents are more likely to use libraries. Majority of Americans still hold very positive views about libraries, despite all of the things going on around the country around challenges to materials and book banning activity. It's a fairly small group, all things considered. In fact, in Pew, they asked Americans of all walks of life, what do you believe that the library does? And I want to share this with you as background, because this is the field where your strategic plan will land. People look at the library as doing something that's quite noble. You provide a safe space for people. You create educational opportunities for people. You spark creativity. You are promoting sense of community. You're helping people decide on information, and you're practically aligned on some things that when people are in moments of crisis or transition, you deliver. This is very noble. This is the real core of the whole idea of libraries transform, geek the library. We're doing something that's aspirational. And then I ask myself every time I look at this slide from Pew in 2016, when they ask people, well, that's nice what you think the library does for other people. What does it do for you? And most people, this is 2015, 2016, I can tell you it's 2022 right now. Most people, when they go to the library, they just want some stuff. They would like to get good stuff. Borrow books, read, watch, and study. Get a little help. And then it kind of tapers off also about, doing things that are a little bit more, programmatically oriented, civic building oriented. Not everybody needs all that all the time. In some of your libraries, you are the only interesting thing in town. I'll give you that. So your classes, your programs, and your lectures might be a little bit higher than other places. But fundamentally, the big list of aspirational things on the previous slide is not the practical nature of what library users use it for. There's no problem with that. In fact, Pew in 2016 did us a massive favor. They asked Americans, what would happen? How would you feel? Would there be an impact on your life if the library closed? If your library closed, would it have any impact on you or on your community? The results, I think, are fascinating and very important for you for your strategic planning process and the way that you frame your strategic plan, your long-range plan in terms of its fundability, because Americans in the main said if the local library closed, it would have a major impact on my community. 66% of Americans said there'd be a major impact on my community. 25% said a minor impact. I mean, I don't know who the 6% are who said no impact on the community. Apparently they've never been around a library or a librarian before. Everybody thinks that the community will be harmed in some way if the library closes. And then you go on to ask the average American, if you're Pew, what about you or your family, the people you love the most? What kind of impact will it have? 33% said there'd be a major impact on their own lives, but some minor impact, sure. And then a whole bunch of people saying it's not going to matter too much to me. And I got to be honest with you, a lot of other library organizations, when this came out in 2016, kind of freaked out when they saw this. They said, oh no, we have to get that 33% up to 50. 50% of people have to find a major negative impact. They have to use the place in order to appreciate it. And we have to, if we threaten its removal, they'll react in a very positive, defensive way. And I don't look at it like that here at Every Library. We never have. We look at this as a wellspring of compassion that folks around the country, whether they use the place or not, say to you, don't worry about me, I'm okay. What about those other people? Because it goes back to that first slide about aspiration. On the practical side of things, yes, perhaps I like to borrow books and I like to borrow DVDs. I like to borrow, streaming and all that kind of good stuff. But there, but for the grace of God, go I. The compassion that is at the core of this conversation about how what what kind of resources do you need at your library in order to realize this hope that people have, not just about closing and opening. I don't mean it like that. I mean, how do we take care of the other? How do we do the things that are really necessary? There's another data set that I think is extremely important for your ability to write a plan of service, a strategic planning uh, uh, approach that is fundable more than you currently have. And it's an understanding and awareness of where voters are at. Because if it is inherently a political process, as I said before, and the political idioms are going to kick in, we need to know where people are at. Now, this data set is from OCLC and the From Awareness to Funding study from 2018. Granted, it is pre-pandemic. It's certainly pre-Trump. The baseline here, I'm going to give it about 4 sigmas instead of 6 on whether or not it's still holding true in America. But I want to share it with you because it's the most comprehensive data set that we still have of American voters. And it's fascinating because even before COVID, even before the Trump era, coming through the Great Recession and the Obama years, our baseline of voter support from people who will definitely vote yes for the library, meaning that if there was a sample ballot question, shall the XYZ library levy a certain amount of money to support the library? 27% of voters would automatically vote yes. They're the true believers, folks. In your community and mine, it might be a little different number, but it's under 50%. It's certainly a minority party politically. Now, if this was Italy or Sweden or someplace, we could build out a parliamentary coalition with 27% of the voters. But it's interesting to note that these believers are going to be there almost regardless of what you're doing because they have a system of belief that the librarians are doing good things and that the library as an institution is doing something that is, well, transformational. There's another 31% of American voters. Again, this is America. This is not necessarily your town. I don't know what the ratio is exactly, but it's certainly not another 50%. That they're likely to vote yes, but they've got questions. They have sincere questions about where the money's going to go and who's going to spend the money. And I'm going to describe for you as this presentation goes along a little bit more about why we need to be highlighting not just the where's the money going to go parts of our strategic plans, but the who is spending the money question, answering it in a very full voice, and even utilizing those people who are going to spend it as the people who are going to ask where it should go. There's another 42% of Americans who may or will likely never vote for the library. The interesting thing in here is it's about half and half are possibly not going to vote for the library. Another half of that is definitely not going to vote for the library. The interesting part here is the first 21%, those who may not vote for the library, are suspicious about taxes, while the other 21% are anti-tax. The suspicious voters, though, are not lost to us, and we should not consider them lost to us. This is pushing 42%, starting to push 50 here. Things get really troubling if we lose the suspicious voters. And what the suspicious voters need to hear about in your strategic plan, in your marketing, in your outreach around it, is fundamentally what happens to our community? What happens to the people that we care about if we don't do the work? They need to hear not about your strategic plan, but they need to hear the opposite of your strategic plan. What happens if we don't? What happens if we can't? And I'll get into that in some more detail in a moment as well, because what a suspicious voter is, how a suspicious voter is different than a believer, is that they're not going to take your word for it. They need to hear what happens, well, with some honesty and some transparency and some openness. And while you're required to provide your strategic planning process and your strategic plan in that kind of way, open, transparent, consultative, they actually appreciate it because they want to know, well, don't tell me the same old story. Tell me the truth this time. I want to share just a little bit about the slide that happened in support, though, between 2008 and 2018. And we're professionally here at EveryLibrary Institute and the EveryLibrary side of things, we're a little concerned about coming through 2022 into 2023 and everything that's going on in America right now. It's not that people became less interested in the library, less appreciative of librarians. In fact, if you look at the rating here about the percent of people who rate libraries positively, it's gone up. The percent of people who rate librarians positively has stayed pretty much the same. The number of annual visits hasn't changed over that time period, and we will be seeing changes to the way people have interacted over COVID. We got to anticipate that. But what's happened as we move right to left instead of left to right on this is that the number of people who care very deeply and who are willing to vote for it has diminished. Whether that's a factor of the rise of the Tea Party or anti-tax movements, whether it's a rise of anti-government, anti-establishment, or if it's just the general malaise of America going into the COVID era, we need to be very cognizant of how we're currently being perceived and how we're currently engaging folks in order to make sure that that strategic plan is not only legitimate from what folks need, but tied to how they will listen to its efficacy. The non-issues in the OCLC from awareness to funding between those believers, those questioners, those suspicious voters, and those never going to vote for you nevers. The non-issues are, I can't stratify for you about political party or user status, whether or not somebody's a believer. Because this country is littered with libraries named after families that are too rich to use the place. Their user status doesn't matter. They believe in what you do. Likewise, the number of people who are in the never going to vote for you never category, the anti-tax side of things, the number of them who use the library but don't support it politically is pretty significant in some communities. Political party and user status aren't drivers for this, but there's a set of values that are driving it. In fact, another caveat is the number of card holders in a town has nothing to do with the level of support that you have, or where people stratify in that believer, questioner, suspicious voter, and never going to vote for you, never continuum. What does matter, what actually matters, are these value systems and how the library triggers them, how the library supports them, how the librarians enact them. And it's that image of the librarian that also matters a great deal, as we know from the From Awareness to Funding study. OCLC, From Awareness to Funding, 2018, Google it up. It'll be in your resource packet, don't worry. But if you like politics in libraries, read it. If you don't like politics, but you like libraries, you got to read it. Just don't read it before bed. The image of the librarian matters a great deal in what they found because it answers, well, the believers, the questioners, and the suspicious voters want to know where the money's going to go. And they also want to know very clearly who's going to spend their money. Believers, because the librarians and the library workers enact the value system. The questioners, because they want to make sure it's being done properly. And the suspicious voters actually need to hear from an expert about the work that's being done. Unfortunately, the image of librarianship has been sliding as well at the same time as the voter support has been declining. And I'm not sure where we're living right now in your neck of the woods or mine, coming through COVID and this very disrupted period in American politics. But we have to be working on this when we are working on our strategic plan and our long range plans. How do people feel about the staff? Matters a great deal. In fact, you need to do as much survey work in your strategic planning process about how people appreciate or need your services. You have to ask those same kind of questions about whether people appreciate or need your librarians and your library staff. We can't not be in an environment where we're losing 13 basis points over 10 years around something as important as friendly and approachable library staff. We can't be only at 30% nationally on well known in the community about the people who are going to spend a small amount of smart taxpayer money doing work that is fundamentally transformational. From a strategic planning perspective, folks, we need to know where each of your communities are. And we'll get to that in the resource packet as well. We need to know where your communities are in terms of their perception of the staff. Because if it is a situation where it is either disconnected from what the community needs or the perception is somehow under appreciating, we have to work on that with the same kind of engagement and alacrity as we would to attract people to a program. Come out and get a book, use the library's website. All right, back to the political narrative side of things, and back to the conversation around if it's all political. As we looked at voter attitudes just now, we looked at civic attitudes just now. I want to look at the idioms that people use to talk about taxes. One of the most interesting components of what we've been doing on the political action side of things is talking about taxes and talking about libraries at the same time. Taxes make Americans crazy. Libraries don't, but when you put the two of them together, our most significant hope is that by following these kinds of insights, you will avoid changing from the beloved librarians and the wonderful neighbors who are in the library board to the tax man. I don't want you turning into the tax man. In America, in the main, there are three major political narratives. Fundamentally, this comes from a book called The Three Languages of Politics by a guy named Arnold Kling. It's amazing. He's a libertarian himself. He's at the Cato Institute. He's a fellow over there. Arnold Kling talks about the hero narratives and the villain narratives that we tell ourselves about our own politics, and also how we aggregate it across different political leanings. The three main narratives being progressive, conservative, and libertarian. He is talking now more and more about a fourth kind of emerging political narrative around a disruptor. But that's for a later conversation. In the main, the progressive narrative, the libertarian narrative, and the conservative narrative need to be considered when we want to look at how we are asking questions and how our eventual plans will be received by the communities that we're serving. The progressive narrative might be more familiar with a lot of library people. I know from the voter data around the country that in states where there is a partisan primary and people can pull a Democrat or Republican ballot, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 folks who have the word librarian in their job title in the national voter file will pull a Democrat or independent ballot. I'm not talking about small p politics here. I'm sorry, big P politics here about how you're voting, folks. I don't really care. It's how the progressive ideals have really colored the way that library communities speak about the work they do. Arnold Kling here in The Three Languages of Politics talks about how the heroes of the progressive movement are people who have stood up for the underprivileged, and that the villains, the people that a progressive cannot stand, are the people who are indifferent to the oppression of minority, women, and the poor. And if that resonates with you and it makes sense, yes, then you're a progressive. I mean, I run a political action committee for libraries, folks. There's another narrative, though, in communities that we need to be very cognizant of as we're writing our own plans. One of the other two narratives is the conservative narrative. And again, it's a hero and sort of a villain approach. The conservatives in a community, a conservative individual says, my heroes are people who have stood up for Western values. And there are times when, well, the people I cannot stand, the villains in my personal narrative as a conservative, are people who are indifferent to the assault on moral virtues and traditions that are the foundation of our civilization. And there are disconnects happening right now all across libraries where we are being seen not as the champion of the oppressed, but as the barbarians at the gate. I worry a lot that our progressive ideals in libraries are not always well received, but they're, you know, the other problem though is not that just how they're received, but how are we phrasing them? Because if we have a more conservative community, we have to be able to understand how to talk about what we do as a library, talk about our value system as library workers, librarians, and library leaders, talk about our vision for the community and our mission in a way that is more mm, palatable. Sounds like I'm trying to make you change your stripes. I'm not, but more in touch with a slightly different way of phrasing things. Likewise, if you're in a more libertarian part of your state, the heroes to a libertarian are the people who've stood up for individual rights. The people who they cannot stand, the libertarian sector, they cannot stand are the people who are indifferent to the government taking away people's ability to make their own choices, according to Mr. Kling. And you folks work for the government. And I want to be very plain about this. The fact that there is a disconnect around the core value of taxes and the idea you folks have had some good conversations in Utah already about going fine free. But the fine free conversation that appeals to the progressives, as my colleague Peter Bromberg here at EveryLibrary, used to be at Salt Lake City, has said before, the progressive ideal says let's lower barriers, let's make it possible for people who are at the margins of society, who are in crisis. Let's lower the fines, lower the fees, get rid of them, because otherwise let's stand up for those people who are otherwise oppressed. The libertarian side, fine free conversation says let's not double tax ourselves. I mean, you're already taxing us once already. It's not that much. I understand. Let's not make it harder for people to participate in finding their own future, of going their own direction by making a barrier happen. And on the conservative side, fundamentally, the fine free conversation needs to include something that says, well, if they never return the book, we will charge them for it, though, because the book does belong to the community. What happens when we are variant from the political idioms and ways of speech? What happens when we write a story that our audience cannot read because it's written in a foreign political language? It is on us, folks, to make sure that our stories are heard by our audience, that they are read by our readers, that we are not getting in our own way when it comes to the speech that we use in a political way. What happens when we're at odds? I want to give you some more insights as we move through this conversation today in terms of what the legitimate value systems are that are in the community, what the legitimate perspectives are in the community, so that you can write a more well-rounded strategic and long-range plan, and that you can get out of your own way when it comes to the fundability of it. All right, how are people wired? This is a big one. How are people wired? A couple different ways. Understanding the way that your messaging lands politically, we've just gone through that. But then again, there's a few other frameworks. There's some heuristics. There's some ways that decision making kicks in that I want to make sure that you understand, because a well-built strategic plan is not about the features exclusively. It's about demonstrating to your stakeholders, your funders, your partners, how those features are realizing a shared vision, mission, and values. Let's talk first, again, politically, around how people participate in the political process. Yes, you have a progressive mindset you have a conservative mindset, you have a libertarian mindset, you have an outlook on policy, on taxes, on prosaic things like that. But what fundamentally moves any individual voter or constituent to support any particular candidate, what moves any donor to show up for an ideal or a cause, what makes it possible for somebody to be motivated to act not just out of enlightened self-interest, but out of some sort of political altruism. There are four factors that do this. And this insight comes from a great book. It's called The Political Brain. It's by a fellow named Drew Weston. He's on the progressive side. He's the equivalent to Frank Luntz. If you like more conservative approaches to political speech, grab a Frank Luntz book. I'm a little more wired for this guy because I run a political action committee for libraries. Um, Mr. Weston talks about how what drives participation in the political process and identification with the candidate or cause is not the details of the policies. That's at the bottom. It's the particulars of what the policies are don't really matter as much, and neither really do the characteristics of the particular candidate or the particulars of a campaign or a cause. It's the value system that's being realized when we participate in this process together, and the identity that we espouse when we come together. The candidate that I think about the book, I think about the candidate's book, the It Takes a Village, Dreams from My Father, Make America Great Again. Those books are laden with value statements. If you like the candidate and you believe that the candidate will represent you and is aligned with you, you will hold that book to your bosom and you will share it with other people that you also like or love because you have found the person who has a value system that will realize your version of America. And if you don't like it, you're going to throw it at the television set during the next debate because it's offensive to your value system. Likewise, the party alignments that happen in politics in this country, I'm not talking about party politics here, but folks, if we've got 27% of Americans who are believers already in the library, they have a value system, they have an identity that looks like it's shaped like a library, or it identifies with librarians as a candidate for ideals. The reason that Donald Trump ran as a Republican and Bernie Sanders ran as a Democrat was because they could pick up the core identity of those parties. People who say I'm an independent are also identity focused. Again, for every Donald Trump, I'll raise you a Bill Clinton when it comes to the characteristics of libraries. I'm sorry, of candidates. But your strategic plan is going to be laden with, it's going to be full of, it's going to be lousy with a lot of specific policies, a lot of specifics that are about how do we recognize and realize, a lot of measurements which are necessary, appropriate, and also under standard number 3 for the Utah State Library required. But in the main, the folks who want to care about your strategic plan, who want to co-create a funding future where the strategic plan is realized, who want to participate as more than just people who are going to use it, but are going to help you advance it, are going to do it not because of the particular policies, but because of the value system that you're trying to push forward, in the identity that you have as either building community or supporting humans. It is about politics because it's about taxes. It's not because we want to politicize this conversation unduly or play politics with it. But we're wired to talk about how do we want to use a small amount of smart tax money in a way that builds a shared value system. All right. There's another set of ways that people are wired to read your strategic plan when you write it. And I want you to know about this ahead of time. Or they're wired to listen to the stories that you're telling about the strategic plan. So I want you to know what they are ahead of time. There are 4 major approaches to the way people how are they disposed to be involved in something, to listen, to respond. One way is compassion. And we saw that in those earlier slides, particularly from the Pew side of things. The 66% who look at don't close the library, my community will suffer. The 33% who say, no, I'm okay, don't worry about me. Compassion drives a lot of our narratives in libraries, and it's completely appropriate. We have a compassion about a population at large. We want to help the homeless. We want to help the third graders learn how to read. We want to help people in moments of transition or crisis, or individual folks. The stories that we always tell about helping a particular kid learn how to read, somebody find their first, best, or next job, learn how to use the computer, get on the internet for the first time. All those compassion stories are only one of 4 potential stories that your strategic plan needs to tell. And it's one of the 4 key reasons that you're doing what you're doing. And it might not even be a quarter of your population. They just might be the ones who show up most frequently to library stuff. Because there's just as much importance in a pride conversation in a community as there is in a compassion story, because we have a kind of wiring where folks are focused on pride. I love my community. I want to see a more interesting place to live, a more thriving place to live, a more prosperous place to live. And while everybody's got a really good story about helping some kid learn how to read, tell me what you're doing from a systems perspective to build infrastructure around here that'll make it more interesting, thriving, and prosperous. How are we giving people a hand up instead of a hand out? That might be 25%, might be 30%, might be 11% of your population. I don't know exactly, but a lot of folks who are involved as elected officials and involved in systems kind of thinking organizations and agencies and funders certainly are more interested in a systems conversation and a pride conversation than a compassion conversation at the beginning. Yes, everybody has a heart, but these folks have got a head. All right. The third type of how humans are wired, why do they care about anything, is because of data. And every single other presentation that you've ever seen from a library at a library conference or from a library organization is incorrect about storytelling. They always say, don't be data heavy. Nope, you got to be data heavy for a certain cut of your population, for a certain number of your funders and your partners. I'm going to talk about sports fans for just a minute as a metaphor here. The sports fan, they're very data driven about their appreciation for their team. They can quote statistics to you all day long. RBIs, what else happens? Strikes, foul balls. I don't know. I'm not much of a sports guy myself. I'm more of a pride of place guy. Forgive me. Who's the best power forward in the NBA? Whatever they do in hockey. You know, the data. My father-in-law is this guy, and I'm just going to talk about him for 1 second. My father-in-law, Ed, is a accountant by trade. He's retired now. He's also retired. He's also mostly retired from being an umpire in Chicago 16-inch no glove softball. He's in the Hall of Fame. This guy calls balls and strikes for fun. The best year of his life was 2005 when the Chicago White Sox won the World Series and his first grandchild was born, pretty much in that order. He watches ESPN 1 and 2 until 2 in the morning. And then the next morning he goes out and gets the newspaper and he reads the box scores. He's already seen the games, but he wants to know the numbers. And then what he does as a data person is he turns the page. After he reads the box scores, he turns the page and then he reads about the team. He reads about the team. Management, are they on a streak? Are they on a slump? Is the front office doing something to help improve things? What's up with the star player? You know, those stories that are either compassion or pride stories that your data will allow those kind of people to get into means your data is absolutely necessary. And according to standard number 3 from the Utah State Library, it's required as well. And if we're looking at 2025, 2026 as being an austerity period for municipal funding again, and you're going to need to be able to show the data, because without the data there, those people who want to know the balls and the strikes They want to know whether you're on a streak or a slump. They want to hear about the star player who is your youth services librarian, your reference librarian. They want to know if you're going to build a new ballpark or not. You're going to get a new library. They have to see that data because the outcomes, the expected and hoped for outcomes, the outcomes that you've realized already are that lens to care about your money. All right, there's a fourth type of human. And this fourth type of human is sort of an elastic number in any population based on the amount of crises that's going on. Normally, pre-COVID, I wouldn't have this one on the slide. I have it on the slide for everybody now because we're post or late stage COVID. And if you are not addressing for the concerned or the fear-filled, the solutions that you're providing, the gaps you're filling in a serious and substantial way, they will look at you as being rose-colored glasses. They'll look at you as being a Pollyanna. And if you're not taking this situation seriously, they will not take you seriously. Which is why I bring it up, because right now we are still mitigating crises. And as we move into a period where your strategic plans will be covering, there will be additional crises coming. And the fact that we are required in Utah library standards, and we're compelled by being people who care about libraries to work on mitigating crises, to work on solving problems. The library-shaped solution, the librarian-enacted solution, that we're called to fill gaps, means that we have legitimate stories to tell folks that address concerns and waylay some fears. I don't know what the ratios are in your community, but I guarantee that the people that you want to read your strategic plan need to see themselves reflected, maybe in every single chapter, certainly across the entire plan, around these different ways that these people are all wired to listen. All right, another approach here, and you're going to see where I'm going with this in a little while. Another approach here to understanding how people are wired, how people listen, what's their disposition. Are they heart, they head, are they gut focused when they make their decisions? If we were to have a bullseye about why is someone motivated to act on behalf of an idea or an ideal, if we had a bullseye here where the center of it was, I have had a personal experience, I'm a relational supporter, because I've had a personal experience of the situation that you're describing. In politics, in social movements, and by the way, your library is both. And you've got the political side because it's about taxes. It's a social movement because you're doing work that's transformational. The relational supporter is somebody who has an identity, who knows who you are and what you do and why you do it. They're similar to the believers in that earlier deck about how voters are trusting of you, but it's equivalent in libraries to, let's say, it's people who participate in the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Walk for Life. They are, they themselves might be a survivor. They might have lost someone. They want to walk for their sister, their auntie, their cousin, their friend. They know it. And mercifully on the cancer side, and also strategically here on the library side, there's not as many of them as there could be. And it's not that we need everybody to become a relational supporter. I want to take them where they're at. So writing a strategic plan with those people in mind is very nice. It's very comfortable. But I need you to also think about the other types of supporters as we move out to the edges of the bullseye. The next ring of people who support anything. This is, well, is it Greenpeace? Let's talk about the environmental movement for a second. The relational supporters are people who are personally affected, and they might work on a cleanup. They'll go and they'll pick up garbage at the stream or the lakefront. They will, in their most strident kind of volunteerism, literally Greenpeace people, they'll get in the boat. But we don't expect a lot of people to get in the boat. Most people, when you're talking about a campaign, something that's idealistic, something that's political, if they're ideologically aligned with what the librarians are doing and who library workers are, that's awesome. They're not going to get in the boat with you, but they believe that we should have a clean environment. They believe that we should have a clean environment, and they'll cut you a check in order for you to do it. Then knocking on the door, hi, I'm John, I'm with Greenpeace, get in the boat with me? Mm-mm. Hi, I'm John, I'm with Greenpeace. We do things to preserve, protect, and extend something that you believe in. Here's how we do it. Here's how we want to do it. Do you want to join us? Then this is the pathway as an ideological supporter to become involved. Cut me a check, be a volunteer, be a part of this movement. Your strategic plan needs to provide people pathways to do that sort of ideologically aligned involvement with your work. They want to see their own ideologies resonant within your strategic plan as well. If you're doing a story time, an ideological supporter, well, a relational supporter might have a kid who's the right age, but even then, they might just be a consumer. An ideological supporter is somebody who says, I don't even have a kid that's the right age, but I believe in early childhood literacy. And if all you're doing is describing for me the feature of a 10 a.m. story time and that you need enough funding to do 50 of those a year every Tuesday, except for the Christmas holidays, I don't understand the feature's ability to realize my ideological hopes, my value system-based hopes. Okay, you got your relational supporters at the center of the bullseye, you get your ideological supporters out another ring. The third ring out from the center is what we call in politics an aversionary supporter. These are people who are more activism aligned. But there's a type of supporter when it comes to writing strategic plans and doing long range planning that I want to describe here about aversionary people. Aversionary people are like, when they hear about a problem, when they hear about an opportunity, they want to act. They want to avoid bad outcomes. Yes, it is about value systems, but it's also about the principles of it all. They're the ones who are like, can we not throw good money after bad? Can we not screw it up this time, please? And tell me what to do. You in the library leadership team have been paying a lot more attention to this than I have. Tell me what to do, and I'll be very happy to support it. But in the absence of you describing for me what is essentially the negative, and in the absence of you telling me what to do, in order to fix something that we both agree is a bad idea, if it was allowed to persist, the aversionary supporters, in the absence of those stimuli, will not participate in your campaign. They won't be aligned with you, which is why when you're writing a strategic plan, and you need to have components of the conversation that are really looking to say what happens if we do not do the work. There's the suspicious voters on the one hand, there are aversionary supporters on the other. All right, the last ring in the circle, the bullseye, I should say, the last ring in the bullseye around why do people act on behalf of their ideals is a type of person who is called an access supporter in politics. They are not a lot of them in libraries, unfortunately. You got a lot of them in politics. So the people who want to do the $10,000 plate dinner with a candidate, they want to get their picture taken with the president or the candidate. If you can get more of these in libraries, I'd love that. The $10,000 plate. In libraries, they're the kind of people who want to help you, though, move a campaign forward. You know, they want the library champion lives here sign in their front lawn. They want the bumper sticker that says, I read. They want to be recognized for the work that they're doing, and I love them for it. And that's more of a tactical campaign, but I owe you this full slide rather than omitting things that are important. Part of any marketing plan for a strategic plan, part of outreach that goes into validating the strategic plan as being both achievable and fundable, is that other folks besides the relational supporters, other folks besides the usual suspects will help validate the plan in the eyes of the rest of the community. This is a coaching call slide here because we need to take a very specific look in your communities as to whether or not there are enough experts in the things that you do besides you, that there's enough users who are activated already to vouch for you, that there might be a local celebrity or even a celebrity who can say that your strategic plan is the next best thing since sliced bread. That the crowd and the peer-to-peer approach, this is an important area that you have to pay attention to as you're bringing your strategic plan to the forefront. Otherwise, it's going to be a document that sits on the shelf. Most people say the strategic plan is just a document that sits on a shelf if you don't do anything that's in it. I stipulate that. What I'm also saying is if nobody believes in the efficacy of what you're trying to accomplish and nobody is validating it, we have to be able to, in a very friendly and positive way, ensure or engineer that the plan is going to be received and marketed by other than the usual suspects. Okay, that's all interesting, John. What do I do with that? So, the core element of agenda setting. How do I, as a leader, have a responsive approach to what my community needs, and as a leader, set an agenda that we know as experts to be necessary? There is some tension in any strategic planning process around that. Any long-range plan has the tension between what people say that they want and what we know that they need. And I want to describe a little bit more for you about how to make that a less tense environment, and a less detail-focused one when it comes to how do we position this as a fundable project. Human beings have one of three budgets when they want to get to work on it, on any issue. When they want to show up as a volunteer, I'm sorry, there's three budgets, one of three budgets that they have when they want to show up for an idea. And your library strategic plan, your long range plan, is full of ideas and ideals. People can spend their money, meaning that they can be a donor. People can spend their time, meaning they can be a volunteer. People can spend their good name, meaning they can be an activist or an advocacy partner. We have to be able to provide pathways in our strategic plan across at least one of these three things, so those supporters of all those different types can activate with us. It's why we have fundraising activities to say the goals of our strategic plan are threefold. With your donor support, we can accomplish them faster. It's why we say one of our strategic planning priorities is to do X, Y, or Z for a particular population. We have enough staff to get it started, but we need volunteers who are involved in X or Y or Z to show up and do it with us. And it's why we have in our strategic plan the thing that says we need additional funding from our from our municipal partners or from our state legislature or from, God bless us, Congress. Show up and stand alongside us when it comes to time to be a constituent. These three budgets are personal budgets as opposed to budgets for municipalities and states. And I want to put these two different types of budgets on the same slide, because when we're talking about activating the personal budgets, while we're talking about activating new funding budgets, we have to understand that the advocacy component that we're working on most strongly in a strategic plan, in a long-range plan, is not visioning a particular type of service, but what the funding formula is. We need those people to participate with us across their money, their time, or their good name. But when we're looking at the core of our municipal funding structure for libraries in Utah, and my state as well, we have to understand, as we're writing the plan, where the money's going to come from. Not what it's going to go do exclusively, but where it's going to come from. Yes, we've got people who want to work with us in a couple of different ways. But where are we going to get the funding fundamentally? Money only comes from one of four places. You either, as a civic leader, a municipal leader, a legislator, a governor, Congress, you cut something else. And I hate to say it like this, but there are times when a library strategic plan needs to name what else in town should be cut. Or your marketing and your outreach and your advocacy plan needs to name what else needs to be cut in favor of the library. Another place that new money comes from, one of the four, is reallocations or efficiencies across the municipality. Right now, what is being done either improperly, poorly, or duplicatively in your community? What's being done in a way that if you were to take it on with the right resources to take it on, could you do it either with new efficiencies or at a new scale? Reallocations and efficiencies are perfectly acceptable ways to bring new budget to your library. And it may be not to the detriment of your community, but at the expense of other projects that are happening in that municipality. A third way that new money comes for libraries, one of the places that it comes from is outside of your current jurisdiction. That's a grant. That is a relief funding. That's some sort of a philanthropy that benefits you. And outside money is often used in strategic plans or even in annual budgets as a way to paper over shortfalls. And instead, I would suggest folks that we need to use the prioritization of outside money properly, the same way we would prioritize very, very judiciously around cuts, or make recommendations to our municipal partner about efficiencies across the municipality. The fourth place that money comes from, and this is an important element with your strategic plan as the library, this is the point of potential contact that's very strong with other parts of government across your jurisdiction, is that new taxes generate new money for your strategic priorities, and potentially for strategic priorities of other parts of government. There is a decided lack of courage amongst politicians and elected officials to bring up the idea of new taxes. And yet, in areas of growth, in areas of decline, in areas where there's stasis, stability is nice, stasis is a negative. In areas where there's stasis, new taxes need to be talked about, and the courage to do new taxes, to bring in new funding, to stabilize or extend the library's budget in order to realize your strategic planning goals, your long range goals, is absolutely necessary. And that courage that it comes from has to go back to those reasons that people support, why they are aligned, what their ideologies are. Let's talk about the agenda for a moment of your elected officials, because if you're talking about your own strategic planning priorities and you are not connected properly, yes, the political speech, the idioms that are used, the progressive, the conservative, and the libertarian narratives, if you're not connected there, if you're not positioning yourself properly in relation to how you will be heard, if you're not positioning yourself in relation to a compassion narrative or pride of place narrative, if you're not data aware, you're not data driven and data demonstrating, if you're not addressing real grave concerns on the part of the elected officials you're talking to, you've got so many barriers in front of you. I also want to make sure that we talk about one of the other key barriers, especially in Utah and a few other states that we work in, where the city council is not directly responsible for education. And yet, what we do at libraries with our programming, with our services, with our collections, with our staffing, tends to look like education. The reason I'm bringing this up is that elected officials in your neck of the woods and in mine are elected for a wide variety of reasons, of which education might be one of them, but it's the elected school board or the appointed school board that's fundamentally responsible for those things. Education lives inside here, but the agenda of those elected officials who fundamentally control the purse strings and are responsible for helping you co-create a funding future for your strategic priorities, are those elected officials involved in creating more interesting places? Is that why they ran? Is that their personal platform or their party plank? And do they know that the library is the most interesting thing in town? because that's where your programming lives. And if you have a strategic planning process that's really looking at improving the programming that you're doing, to making sure that it meets people where they're at, that the collection gets improved, because you want people to be able to read for fun and enjoyment, that the interesting parts of what's in your building that make it the only performance space in town, the only spot where people can do more than gather for a meeting, but they can also like host things. You are in the business of interesting. And if your elected officials have the agenda about interesting, let's write the strategic plan in the correct way to describe interesting rather than education, rather than story time. Because if your priorities are disconnected from the priorities of your funding partner, while yes, you do have educational priorities, and they could live in another place here, your audience is not going to be paying proper attention. Okay, education. Education in Utah, in my neck of the woods over here in suburban Chicago, education does live within thriving. I'm not trying to minimize it. We make a more thriving place because people get their early childhood literacy supports at the library, that first language literacy supports, that education as a gap filler, the before school, after school, and out of school time. But so does health. So does other well-being kinds of services around community connections, thriving in terms of livability, thriving in terms of how we are feeling about our body politic, all of those things. I mean, folks, people run for your boss at city council. Your bosses at city council want to make more thriving places. And if your narratives in your strategic plan are not geared towards that, if you're not demonstrating first and foremost to your key funding partner that your work fundamentally addresses the things that they care about, you're going to have a harder time bringing in that new funding from one of those four sources. Likewise, there are plenty of politicians and elected officials. And elected officials, by the way, we like elected officials, politicians when we don't like them. There are plenty of people who are in office right now who are running because of prosperity. They're running for prosperity reasons. They want to improve people's first chance at, and the community's best chance at making a good living. They want to see businesses thrive. They want to see individuals have access to the marketplace. They want to see people self-determinant. And prosperity is not a dirty word in libraries. Prosperity is why we have EBSCO databases and Gale databases and ProQuest databases, because we want information and intelligence and market analytics for people to start their business. We want internet services. We want good broadband. We want up-to-date technology because we want people to have access to the global market. It's not just helping people thrive by getting on the internet and reaching out to their kids or their grandkids across the country, around the world. The internet access that you provide is an Etsy store, an eBay shop. The prosperity conversation that the library supports by providing validation to the marketplace is extraordinary. And if all you're talking about is story time, because you like doing story time, you're missing the mark when it comes to writing a strategic plan that has the fundability quotients that you need from an elected official or a funding partner who cares about prosperity. There are two other agenda items that your strategic plan needs to be cognizant of, depending on whether they're present or not in the community. It's duplication of services and efficient and effective. We all know in libraries the adage of we will do more with less. I'm not suggesting you start doing more and more and more with less and less and less. I'd like you to get paid to do the work that you're doing. I would like to see the library have the proper funding to hire good people. But the efficiencies and effective service conversation, along with how do we minimize duplication, a lot of people who are in elected office need to have a strong description made of why you are not the schools, but you do something that is important before school, after school, and out of school. That summertime is your time to shine. How literacy services are being handled in other places. I mean, every time a literacy site opens up, A librarian cries a little bit because, well, shouldn't we be the ones doing this completely? And your elected officials have legitimate questions about that. If your strategic priorities are being laid out without an eye towards minimizing the exposure to these problems, you will have a much more difficult time with your fundability quotient. All right, I've told you what's not supposed to be in the plan. Let me tell you what should be in the plan, okay? And that the plan, your strategic plan, your long range plan, is fundamentally not itself designed to encourage people to use the place. It's designed to have people support you, institutions support you, elected officials and politicians and donors and philanthropists fund you. What encourages people to use you is your marketing and your PR and your outreach. That's very different. This instrument, this strategic plan, has a lot of different constituencies, as I've already been describing. And if it's properly built, it leads to a situation where the resources follow the functions you're hoping to perform, because the functions you're hoping to perform are not simply features of what the library is doing, but a way to realize the communities and the funders' value system and their identity together. Talked about the book before. It Takes a Village, Dreams from My Father, Make America Great Again, the book that you hold to your bosom or you hurl across the room if you don't like it. I was on the board for my local library for 8 years. I was board president for 6 years here in Berwyn, Illinois. Our zip code is 60402. 54,000 people live here. I was born here. I'm raising my sons. My dad grew up here. My grandfather came over from the old country and moved here. If I had known during the time I was the board president on the library board, if I had known that my strategic plan should have been called It Takes a Village with the Berwyn Public Library at the center, or Dreams from My Hometown Public Library, or Make My Library Great Again, I think we would have done better. Now, I wasn't on the board, when I was doing EveryLibrary. It's been since then. But what I know very clearly now is that the fundable plan, whether it's your strategic plan, by the way, or your building plan or your technology plan, your budget, even your annual report, the value system, vision, and mission that you need to carry in those documents is more important than the particulars. That the particulars, of course, matter, especially for management, especially for accountability, especially for measurement. But the depth of it is, how do we work in a way that puts the value system of the library out in front in a way that is budgetable, puts the vision of the library out in front in a way that is available for shared partnerships, and puts the mission of the library out in front in a way that provides for depth of support by individuals and stakeholders. If I had only known, in fact, it's worth looking at the title of your current strategic plan. If it says Ahead to 2023 or Vision 2023 or anything like a pair of New Year's Eve glasses with like a 2.0 and a 2.3 on the left and the right lenses, let's talk about what you're really trying to accomplish. And even philosophically, title it accordingly. Here's why. It's really, really hard for humans to understand if they don't work in a library. And those of you on this webinar today, you're staying with me for a long time. I love you for it. Those of you who are on the library board, and maybe those of you who have not been on the library board for very long, don't even know necessarily what all the features are. I'm not a librarian myself. I've never worked in a library. I don't pretend to work in a library. I'm unqualified for it. I run a support organization, and I used to be on the board of trustees for my local library because I support the ideals. Humans have a hard time listening to features and translating them immediately into what you're hoping for. What's your expected and hoped for set of outcomes? What's your expected and hoped for set of outcomes if we have the right hours, the right collections, the right staff, the right approach to bringing people in and being a welcoming place? And what are the cautions if we don't? What are the organizational mission, vision, and values? Those expected and hoped for outcomes. What happens if we don't? How do we translate those particular features into those kinds of statements? It's fundamentally a writing project for your strategic plan. It's wordsmithing, folks. You know that you need a certain number of hours in order to be a place of discovery or refuge. On the economic side of things, a retail anchor, even like we need the right number of hours because we know that people leave their homes, they go shopping, they come to the library. We need the right kind of hours on Sundays and Saturdays because we know people leave their homes, they come to the library, they go shopping. We're part of the terroir of this livable place, this thriving place, this prosperous place. Our hours are compassionately engaged with folks who need it and strategically engaged around pride of place. Our collections and our circulation, we look at our collection. We look at our collection as a way to solve problems. Our youth services collection helps parents solve problems. Some of it's entertainment and enjoyment, some of it's education for their kids and self-determination. The decisions that a parent can make about what they want to have in front of their own kids, we're helping them solve problems with our collections. We're helping with our databases, small businesses, individuals looking for work. We've got resources left, right, and center that will help fix the future for somebody when there's an asteroid kind of coming to hit them. The size of our staff. How do we put ourselves back into a place where the librarians and the library workers are not doing retail, but they're doing something that's mission, vision, and values driven? That the expertise that they have is vital. It's as vital as the collection. It's as vital as the hours. It's as vital as the building. How do we look at our metrics, not just as cold numbers? And you need those cold numbers, by the way. But how do we look at that as lives touched and changed and improved? I mean, something as prosaic as library card signups. How many new card members do we have? How many new card holders do we have? How many new members do we have? How many patrons do we have? Those issues around access and identity as people who read, as supporting a culture of reading. Yes, we need a certain number. We need a certain amount. We need a certain approach in our strategic plan. But the way it's going to land with folks who care about funding it, who care about participating and supporting it, is going to be when you can make this transition into values, mission, and vision realization business. Marketing is a great element of your strategic planning process, anticipating how you're going to market this thing. I would highly recommend, well, first off, when you market things for tomorrow, you are doing what you're supposed to do, which is to encourage people to use the place, use the thing, uptake whatever you're offering. Marketing tomorrow, fundamentally, is story time, 10 a.m., bring your kids. Okay, great. There's a number of people who are story time eligible. The story time is at 10 a.m. if they have kids of the right age. Good marketing is not just the facts there, but good marketing is like, okay, story time, 10 a.m. Thursday, bring your kids. Miss Karen, who's our expert librarian, loves your kids too, and she's going to work on letter shapes and numbers and first language literacy, and she's going to help you be a better parent and is your partner. And 10 a.m. story time, bring your kids. There's only a certain inventory of people who are available in your community who have kids who are available themselves at 10 a.m. And yes, having them come is awesome. It's the whole reason we're around. Except the fundability of your plan is determined by whether or not the people who don't have kids believe that you are doing something that is appropriate, necessary, powerful, impassioned, even, who understand based on your marketing what you did yesterday at 10 a.m. with a bunch of kids. At 10 a.m. yesterday, at 10 a.m. every Thursday, first Thursday of every month for the last year. At 10 a.m. every week, we've had 15 kids. We've had 50 kids. We've had 150 kids. Yesterday, we did something whether you have a kid or not, that realizes your value system about literacy or your compassion about taking care of kids who are in moments of transition or crisis. It realizes your political ideals by building community as a conservative or lowering barriers as a libertarian, the hand up instead of the hand out. Yesterday, we did something. This past year, we did something. And in our evaluations of our current strategic plans, which are required, by the way, in standard number 3 for the Utah State Library, the requirements that we have for evaluation need to be marketed as either impactfully realizing the value system that the tax dollars and the donor dollars support, or describing your attempt at doing it. Here's why. While there are 4 sources of money, the cuts, the efficiencies, the money coming in from the outside as grants or donations, or new taxes, there's only 2 reasons to give you money. There's 3. Inertia. Inertia is a great reason to keep giving you money, but it doesn't really move very much. There are only 2 new reasons to give you new money. And therefore, your strategic plan, in the main, has only one of 2 stories to tell. Stories of your success, which demonstrate your competency, or stories about failure that demonstrate your integrity. Let me spin this up a little bit more for you. Stories of success demonstrate your competency, means that you are good at what you do. You deserve to have some funding for it. Because when you get a small amount of smart funding for it, you put it to work in ways that are demonstrably effective. There's a value system that underpins it all. You have a vision for what happens, and the mission that you're on can be shared. And that in order to, so if you're asking for new funding, you're asking to either scale up your current success or replicate it in a different way. Your strategic priorities say, we have been very good at story time. We have 15 kids, we need 50. We need room for 50. We're competent at it, we're good at it, people like it, we can show you the numbers. We want to scale it up from 15 to 50. Or we're really good at story time. We want to do it for seniors. We want to do it for people who are first language literacy focused. We want to do it in another area. Our competencies, our demonstratable competencies, are replicable if properly funded for our features, hours, staffing, collections, programs, etc. That is a beautiful story to tell. We would like to scale up our success. We like to replicate our success. And your funding partners are interested in hearing your legitimate stories of success. Likewise, your funding partners, if we go back to the beginning of this conversation around what it means to have budgeting happen in times of austerity as well as in times of great boon. The austerity budget requires you to be very honest, to bring your integrity, and to say there is either an existing or impending failure happening. It might be with the library. It might be with the community. Where does failure live? But your ability, if there's failure present or if there's failure coming, your integrity is all that you have to distinguish yourself from every other agency in town, every other group in town, every other nonprofit in town. Your integrity and the competency that you have as librarians, you have the ability with new funding to either avert the crisis or fix the failure. You have a way to talk about that using either data and stories that you already have from your own library, or data and stories from other libraries around the country. That's the beautiful thing about a strategic plan, by the way. When there's 9,586 other libraries out there, you can poach good stories from other folks to say, we can avert this crisis. We can fix this failure that's happening. But every other story that you tell, whether it's about helping a kid learn how to read, or something you like to do, or a fun program that you had, or an interesting or challenging moment that you addressed, they fall by the wayside because the only reason to give you any new funding is either you're going to scale up or replicate your success, or you're going to nudge the asteroid before it hits the Earth. You have to be cognizant when you're writing your strategic plan about the value system and the vision and the mission. If I've said it on this slide, I've said it 100 times already on this thing. But part of surfacing your values, vision, and mission is the core elements of why you are doing the work that you are doing collectively. Because everyone else that is reading your strategic plan, everyone else who's listening to your presentation that you're doing in front of the Rotary Club, the City Council, to the church group, no one else besides you folks from the library are librarians and library leaders. You have to surface why you're doing the work that you do, because you have to describe to people where your shared values are, where your shared vision is, where your shared mission is. And no one besides the library group that's writing the strategic plan or the long range plan understands what happens if you don't do the work that's described in the plan. That expertise about defining the negative, about talking about what happens if you don't do the work, is the key differentiator between a plan that is unrealizable and unfundable in its truth, and one that moves people and organizations and funding partners and municipalities forward in terms of co-creation. A lot of other groups care. This is an organizational alignment. A lot of other groups care about what you're up to. And having a way to solicit common agenda across these different groups, and a way to root your work across different parts of society, it's extremely important to do. The isolation that I'm trying to obviate here for you, and the vocabularies for the organizations and big stakeholder groups that you're talking to, that you have to understand. If you want to make an economic development play in your next strategic plan, if you want to really truly address issues around well-being or grade level reading, or the COVID slide, or any of these key issues, your strategic plan needs to be written less like a library's and more like an agency that covers these topics also. Individuals. I want to come back to this thing about people and about voters and constituents. To ask you to please remember, as you're starting to think through your planning process, that there really are 4 groups. There's one group that's not on the slide. They're never going to vote for you, never. But there's a group of believers who believe, and they want the aspirations. There's a group of questioners out there who want the details. Where's the money going to go, and who's going to spend the money? And there's a group of people out there who are very suspicious about taxes of any sort right now, who need to be told the truth. The believers are value system focused. The questioners are themselves interested in topics that might not be the library, but might be library adjacent. They want to know the mission and the vision. And the suspicious people, they need to hear what happens if we don't. In fact, Plan A and Plan B are the heart of your next strategic plan. The most critical element is describing, well, here's our aspirational goals. Here's our stretch goals. Here's our measurements of success. And here's what happens if we are improperly or underfunded. If we are improperly or disempowered, if we are not able to do this kind of work. It's not to the detriment of any of your hopes. It's a reality that puts dollars to the value system that you want to espouse. Okay, we're coming around the horn now, team. It's been a long conversation. I really appreciate you sticking with me. And it's an important one because we're looking to drive the fundable nature of your library through this period where there's relief money available and people are trying to figure out what to do with it, and into a period where there will be diminished resources for government and you're part of government. Your strategic plan is not about marketing and messaging to become users. In fact, if you have a litmus test about people becoming a user before they can be a supporter, you will probably alienate them. In fact, back to the OCLC data from a little while ago, there's no difference between users and non-users in their willingness to support the library, to be a believer or a questioner, or even a suspicious voter. You got plenty of suspicious voters who are users. It's as difficult to make a user out of a supporter as it is to get somebody to quit smoking. It's a lifestyle change. And I cannot stress enough how we have to have people meet people where they're at about their user status. However, when you're communicating your strategic plan, when you're writing your strategic plan, you will have two aspects of your audience. One is a user and one is a non-user, because that's how the world shakes out in terms of the library tribe. It's not the library party. The library party is comprised of plenty of people who are users and non-users. But if you're a user, you need segments of your strategic planning narrative that say, as you know, to them, even if they don't. As you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with the high school right around the corner, the library fills up. The Wi-Fi goes down. Everybody who's over the age of 30 flees the library. As you know, we are the only place in town that does X and Y and Z for these kids. As you know, without the resources that come from our taxpayer support, we cannot. As you know, this community needs our library to be properly equipped to do X, Y, and Z at scale, even if they don't know, because the user wants to be included. This might be in the marketing of your strategic plan, the positioning of it, the difference between the things that you hand out inside the library versus the things you bring to community meetings, what you put up on your website. The non-user. When you're doing marketing and outreach in a narrative around your strategic priorities to the non-user, you need to begin with, as you can imagine. As you can imagine, with the high school right around the corner at 3 o'clock, this place fills up. The Wi-Fi goes down. Everybody who's over the age of 30 flees. As you can imagine, we're the only place in town that does X and Y and Z for these kids. As you can imagine, without the resources that would come from this new request, we cannot do that at scale. We cannot replicate it for kids who need it in another part of town. As you can imagine, because if they're capable of imagining, you've got yourself a beautiful opportunity to build a new supporter, a new ally, a new partner. If they're incapable of imagining it, you've done something that's important, which is you found out that your audience is in some ways closed to you, and you can move on. There's a lot more folks that need to hear from you. Again, putting this all into practice, talking about plan A and plan B with equal engagement. Plan A fundamentally has a phrasing to it. When you're talking about our strategic priorities, the reason that we're asking for funding to realize our strategic priorities is that so that we can do a certain thing for a certain population. So that we can is a beautifully psychoactive phrase. And it's true. We are asking for it so that we can realize our value system in the world. And plan B, which is the underfunded or unfunded version of your strategic plan, the misaligned, the disempowered version. If we're not properly funded or supported, it means we cannot or won't. And for your plan to be fundable means you have to describe how you will not, you cannot, and you won't, because it motivates the folks who are not just hope-filled, they're concerned, they're cautious, they're suspicious. The image of the librarian, again, putting this all into practice. And this has all been a lot of theory right now. I got another slide or two that are a little bit more practical. But the reason I want to give you this framework is that without reviewing I mean, I would like to go back through your existing strategic plan with you. Did you talk about where the money's going? Probably. Did you talk about who's going to spend the money? When the image of the librarian, the hope that people have that somebody, all the way back to the beginning of my conversation a little while ago with you, if compassion is at the core of why people support libraries and have a hope that what's going on there is appropriate and transformational and going to do something that realizes their vision or their values or their mission, then who is doing that work? The librarians and the folks who work at the library, the who of who's doing that work, you folks are a proxy for their compassion. You are doing something as the librarians and the library workers that somebody believes in, but isn't or can't do themselves. And the strategic plan needs to highlight and raise up that image of the compassionate and engaged librarian and library worker in order to answer the second part of that key question. Because otherwise, it's a black box on the corner with a bunch of bureaucrats doing something. 4 quick tips for you, and this gets into the coaching side of things some more. We can certainly help you with these elements. We're here for the next year with the Utah State Library to do these kinds of coaching calls based on these sorts of theoreticals. If our thesis is correct and that non-users matter as much as users do, then your strategic planning process needs to talk to non-users, not about turning them into not making them come in the building. Again, it's like getting them to quit smoking, changing their lifestyle. It's what's their value system about the work that you already do. Talking to non-users about their value system, their appreciation, their perceptions. Yeah, they can't tell you how good you're doing. They have no idea. But they can tell you how much it matters. We believe very firmly that you need to do survey work in order to understand what both your users and your non-users think. And if the view of a non-user who might be an ideological supporter, an aversionary supporter, even a relational supporter, if they matter, if the political side of it, the enfranchised side of it, we have to be doing our survey work for our next strategic planning process, evaluation as well as development. I mean, I love door-to-door surveys. We're big fans of door-to-door here at EveryLibrary, probably because we're so into politics, knocking on the door. Hey, this is the candidate that I represent. Personally, I'm running for something. Can I get you behind me? Doing the survey work in different locations than the library will help ensure, won't guarantee, but it'll help ensure that you're capturing a broad-based and legitimate cross-section of the value systems of the community. Again, back to the issue of asking questions about the perception of the librarian and not just the institution itself. Vital. How we doing, folks? And then if you're really looking for a very significant ask, and this goes back to the coaching calls that the EveryLibrary Institute will be very happy to do with you over the course of the next couple of months, running an actual poll about tolerance for taxes might be necessary. If you're looking to affect the tax base and not just administratively talk about cuts or efficiencies, not just put on your strategic plan that we're going to apply for a bunch of grants, or we're going to go after philanthropy, but if we're really looking at a situation where perhaps we need to talk about the tax base, you have to do that in a way that's very cognizant of the taxpayers' attitudes. And it may not be able to come from the library directly. It might need to be done by one of your allied organizations, and I would like to have that conversation with you as you're moving forward. All right, I gave you a lot of data, gave you a lot of insights. I hope that they were interesting to you. You got the slide deck already. You have a part of your packet for this webinar series. This one, you have a chapter of a book called The Fundable Strategic Plan. Writing the Fundable Strategic Plan is the chapter. It's from a book called Before the Ballot that myself and my colleague Patrick Sweeney wrote a couple years ago. I hope I'm giving you the theoretical environment. Are people compassionately engaged? Are they looking at their ideals based on pride of place? Are they the data driven, the sports kind of person, or are they concerned or fear filled? The idea that we are driven by our shared values and our shared identity before we're driven in politics by the character of the politician or the particular policies, that we have these bullseye proximities to the ideals of what we're trying to accomplish, the relational supporters ideologically aligned with things like literacy or learning, aversionary, like let's not screw it up, or people who want access in a political space, or perhaps want to be the champion for the library. And then the two stories about extending success, either replicating or scaling it up, or fixing failure, which you're either averting or addressing. Putting that all to work, folks. This is the interesting part. There's a Cartesian product here. If you multiply all these out, I think it's 256 different potential um, uh, uh, personas for humans who will listen to you. You don't need 256. You might need 9 or 7 or 5 for your city council, your county commission, your town board. You might need, a dozen or so for a legislative committee. You might need a passel of them for an interest group that you're trying to work with, or motivate to behave in a particular way. You can take this and say, let's have a topic like collection development. We need large print. And we take somebody who has a data lens on the universe. We want to talk about the shared values across what it means to have a large print collection. They're ideologically aligned with you. They're not very close, but they're in an allied kind of group. And what you want to talk about is extending your success rather than impending failure that you want to correct. So the data says in about a large print collection that 27% of our current population is low vision or no vision, and by 2035 or 2030 it's projected to increase to 35%. In addition, there are a certain number of people who are in our community who need help with learning, either learning disabilities or learning challenges, and large print is proven in study after study to help address that. We have a hope in our strategic plan to acquire 15 new linear feet of excellent large print collections, and also to be able to teach people how to use devices like the Kindle and their phones to increase print size and to be more fluent with that. We are aligned on making sure that everyone in the community is able to have that sort of a resource because we believe that everyone has self-determination if they are in that kind of a space. The ideology that we would want to express here is to position it then to somebody or a group that says you as a stakeholder in literacy or learning, you as a stakeholder in senior services or services for themselves for the blind and visually impaired, you are aligned with this goal already. We make an assumption about that, and we describe what our assumption is. And we already have a good track record of doing this kind of work for folks who need it. With the new resources that come from collection development and the new staffing that comes from the digital navigator side of things, we will be able to achieve those goals, going back to the data, by that 2030 date with your support. You can do these things again and again and again with a little bit of practice. And I'm looking forward to having a chance to start to break that ground with you as we move through this coaching and training year together. Let's bring it back. All right, team, a lot of data, longer session. First one, thank you for staying with me. Standard number 3. Standard number 3 for Utah libraries says that the board is working on that long-range strategic plan. It's got to cover that time span, and it must contain not just the vision and mission statements, but baked into it baked into what we're trying to get done are all of these different elements, and the way to transmit it, not just for the features, but for the depth of how you want to behave as an organization and a group of individuals who realize, with a small amount of smart taxpayer money, a comprehensive vision for the community. All right, we're going to do a coaching call September 27th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time online. Again, as I mentioned very early in this presentation, the Utah State Library will be sending that out, that dial-in information. And I'm available. My colleagues are available here at the EveryLibrary Institute. My email address is there. My phone number is there. If you have something burning in your heart, I'd like to talk about it. And if you have something that's very particular and very peculiar to your own library, and you want to think it through together, that's why we're here. I do appreciate Rachel at the State Library training side of things, and Chandra as the State Librarian, for having us meet you today on this first of a year's worth of conversations. Thank you for taking the time. I will see some of you on the 22nd of September, and then thereafter. All right, team, be well.